And I believe that the presentation, disclosure, the prospective financial information is not applicable. The qualified and also opinion the report is prospective financial statement should be expressed and withdrawn, and engagement should be made with the public. For example, the financial statements fail to disclose adequate consequences assumption, which is highly sensitive. When it's stating that one or more significant assumptions do not provide a reasonable basis for prospective financial information prepared on the basis of this estimate assumption. One or more significant assumption is not provide a reasonable basis of the prospective financial statement given hypothetical assumption, and those opinions setting out the reasonable of the report and the prospective financial statement should be expressed. A drawdown and engagement should be made, and the examination of affected by the condition and the preclude application of one or more procedures considered necessary. Either withdrawal of the engagement or disclaimer of the opinion or describing the scope limitation of the report or the prospective financial is considered. Documentation matter that is important on them, providing evidence to support the report on the examination of prospective financial information. The evidence that such information are carried out in accordance with the SAE should be documented. So the companies are proceeding for the assurance of a service reporting on prospective financial information on a project. On the going through the project details, is notice a disclosure reflected in the prospective fixed asset we acquired in the prospective financial information has been calculated in accordance with the provision of income tax act. No disclosures made in respect to how the matter should be proceeded. Okay, we see 304 assuming as assurance reports on the controls of service operation. The SAE 304 declares assurance engagement undertaken by the provision account in the public practice to provide a report for use of the user entities and their auditors and accounts of the service organization and provides and service to the entities. These likely to be relevant to the entities. The internal control is related to the financial reporting. In complement to SAE 4.5, it is a report in accordance with the SAE and capable of providing appropriate evidence on SAE 4.2. Scope of SA 3.4.2. SA 3.4.2 applies only when there is a service organization is responsible for, otherwise able to provide an assumption about unsuitable design of control. It does not deal with assurance engagement. The report only whether the control at the service organization is as described. Or report only the controls and the service organization or other than related to service that is likely to be related to the user entities. Internal control as in the financial report, for example, controls that affect the user entities protection or control. What service organization? The service organization refers to third-party organization, a segment or third-party organization that provides services to the user entities that are likely to be relevant to the user entities. Internal control is related to the financial code. User entities refer to this entity as a user service organization. Why controls of service organization is important on the user entities internal control? The control related to the service organization operates and a complete objective may be relevant to the entities internal control or it's related to the financial reporting. Such controls may obtain assertion from the presentation and disclosure relating to the account balances and class of transaction and disclosures and pertain to the evidence that is used auditor evaluate using the applying the allocation. For example, companies outsource the payroll processing. A payroll processing function to the service organization. The service organization is responsible for the accurate preparation of the payroll and timely remittance of the statutory dues and government authorities on behalf of the company. The payroll processing service organization control related to the timely remittance of the payroll deductions to the government authorities and may be relevant to the companies as a due and remittance should result in the result of penalties and resulting in liabilities of the user entities. Controls at service organization, including aspect of the entity's information server systems maintained by the service organization. They may also include aspect of one or more of the other components of internal control of service organization. For example, such control service organizations may include aspect of the service organization, control environment, monitoring and control activity when they relate to service provider. And however, they include control of the service organization. They are not related to achievement of the control objective stated in the service organization. Description of the system, for example, control related to the preparation of financial service organization, its own financial statements. It's determining whether the control service are related to the operations and complaints are likely to be relevant to the user entity's internal control as related to the financial reporting in a matter of professional judgment. Having regard to the control objectives set by a service organization and some sustainability of the criteria. User auditor and service auditor. User auditor is an auditor who audits the reports on the financial statement of the user entity. Service auditor is a professional accountant in a public practice that requires of a service organization provides an assurance report on the control of a service organization. Objectives of a service auditor are accordance with the SA 3402. Objective of a service auditor. Now, to obtain assurance about whether all the material aspects are based on a certain criteria. The service organization describes the system fairly presented as the systems are designed and implemented through the specific area. In the case of type 1 report, specific date. The control related to the control objective related to the service organization described in the system. A suitable design through the specific period. In the case of type 1 report, a specific date. Whether includes a scope of engagement, a scope of control operate effectively to provide reasonable assurance that the control objectives are stated in the service organization describes of its systems are achieved throughout the specific period. May achieve fair percentage systems and control is probability. The report of matter A above is according to the service auditor's finding. Type A report, type 2 reports. Type 1 report that comprises, type 2 report comprises. Type 1 report, service organization describe of its system. And type 2 reports also have service organization describing of its system. A return assertion of a service organization that all the material aspect based on suitable criteria. So return assertion of the service organization that is all material aspect on the given criteria. Description fairly presents. Service organization systems are designed and implemented at a specific dates. Description of the fairly presented service systems and designed and implemented at a specific date. We have this a control related to the control objective stated in the service organization description on its systems. A suitable design of a specific date. Same thing here, description fairly presented service organizations report are designed and implemented for a specific period. The control related to control objective related to a service organization describe the systems are suitable for the specific through the specific period. Here the service auditor assurance report that conveys reasonable assurance about the matter point to specific date at the specific period. The control related to the control objective stated in the service organizations of the systems are operating effectively throughout the specific period. Service auditor assurance report that conveys reasonable assurance about its matter and include descriptions of the test of the controls and the result and therefore type 1 report is a description, design, control organization. I think description of design, description and design and control service organization during the period. But type 2 report is a report to describe design, operation, effective and control of a specific throughout the period. How such an engagement process how such an engagement is proceeded. Complaints with the ethical requirement, determine the management and those charged with governance, acceptance of change in terms of engagement, and accessing suitability of the criteria, determining of materiality, obtaining understanding of service organization, obtaining evidence regarding the description, obtaining evidence regarding the mediation of control, obtaining the evidence regarding the operating efficiency control, understanding the internal audit functions, asking the different questions. These are the 11 points involved. How such engagement process will the complaint to the ethical requirement. The service organization should comply with the relevant ethical requirement includes pertaining to independence, relating to assurance engagement, two things. Determining of management those charged with governance, communication with them. Service auditor shall inquire of request and representation from communicate with or otherwise interact with the service organization wherever required. The service auditor shall determine the appropriate person with the service organization management or service organization governance structure with whom to interact. Acceptance and changes in terms of engagement. Before accepting such engagement, it shall be ensured the service auditor that necessary capabilities and competence to carry out this engagement on the position with them. We also need to ensure that criteria is applied by the service organization to prepare a description of the system be acceptable and available to user entities and the auditors on the scope of engagement and the service organization description of the system. It will not be so limited that likely to be useful for the entity of the auditors. If one service organization requests a change in the scope of engagement before the completion of engagement, the service auditor shall satisfy that there is a reasonable justification for such change. Assessing the suitability of the criteria, service auditor shall assess whether the service organization has used suitable criteria to perform the description, preparing the description of the system, in evaluating the controls of suitable design, or in the case type 2 reports in the evaluation of controls operating effectively. Determination of materiality when planning and performance of engagement. planning and performing the engagement, service auditor shall consider materiality in respect of fair presentation of the description and suitable of design control and case the type to report operating efficiency, effectiveness and obtain an understanding of service organization system. The service auditor shall obtain an understanding of the service organization system, including controls that are included in the scope of engagement. Obtaining evidence regarding the description. The service auditor shall obtain and read the service organization description of its system and evaluate whether the aspect of the description included in the scope of engagements are fairly presented. Fairly presented. Evidence obtained during design control. Service organization determine whether the controls of service organization necessary to achieve the control objective. Stating service organization describe its systems and shall access whether these controls are suitably designed. Proper designer. Obtaining evidence regarding operating efficiency of control. When the providing type to report, the service auditor shall test the controls where service auditors are determined necessary to achieve the control objectives stated in the service organization, describing systems and assessing its operating effectiveness throughout the period. Understand the internal audit function. If the service organization has an internal audit function, the service auditor shall obtain understanding of the nature of the responsibility of the internal auditor function and activities performed in order to determine whether the internal auditor function is likely to be relevant to the engagement order for a service auditor to specific work of internal auditor. Asking for term presentation. The service auditor shall request the service organization to provide a written representation. What kind of return service? Asking for a return representation to the service organization. 3 counts that reaffirm the assertion accompanying the description of the system. It has been provided service auditor with the relevant information to access the agreed to. Third, it is disclosed the service auditor and any of the following if we are aware. Non-compliance is that it is disclosed to service auditor any of the following which it is aware. The non-compliance with law and regulation, fraud, incorrect deviation or attributable to service organization by affected one or more entities. Design deficiencies in control. Intends whether the controls has not operated as described. Any event subsequent to the period covered by a service organization described of its system up to the date of service auditor assurance report that could have significant effect on the service auditors and assurance engagement. Subsequent events. In this service auditor shall inquire whether service organization is aware of the event subsequent to the period covered by a service organization describing of the service up to the date of service auditor assurance report that could have significant effect on the service auditor assurance report. Reporting. Service auditor's assurance report shall include following reason. The title that clearly indicates the reports of independent auditor assurance report. Address of identification of service organization describing of the system and a service organization assertion which include the matter of type 2 report and for type 1 report. The part of the service organization describing of its system, any of the not covered in the service audit opinion. The description refer to the need for a complementary user entities control. The statement that the service auditor has not evaluated the sustainability of design or operating effectiveness of the complementary users entities control, and the control objective states the service organization described of the system can be achieved only if a complementary eligibility controls are suitable in design or effectively conducted along with the control of the service organization. If the service is performed by the sub-service organization, the nature of the activities performed by the sub-service organization is as described in the service organization and description of the system. Identification of criteria, the party specifying control objective. A statement that reports and the case of type 2 report describing the test controls and the intent user only, and the user entities and the options and auditors. This is sufficient guessing understanding of the answer also, along with the information including information about the control operated by the user entity themselves, assessing the risk of material misstatement of the user entity financial statement. Statement that the service organization is responsible for preparing and describing its system, accommodating the assertion including completeness, accuracy, method of presentation of the description and the assumption. Provide service covered by the service organization describing the system, stating the control objectives which is not identified by law or regulation, other for example group of professional body, and designing and implementing control achieve and control objectives stated in the service organization description is control. Statement that a service auditor is responsible to express an opinion in the service organization description on a design of the control related to the control objective stated in the description, and the case of type 2 report on operating the effectiveness of this control based on the service organization auditor's procedure. Statement of the engagement as performed according to the SA 3402 and assurance report on the control at a service organization, which requires service auditor comply with ethical requirement, plan and perform obtain reasonable assurance about whether all the material aspects and the service organization described of its systems is fairly presented and controls are suitably designed, and the case of type 2 report is operating effectively. A summary of the summary service auditor's procedure to obtain a reasonable assurance, and a statement of the service auditor believe that the evidence obtained is sufficient and appropriate and provide a basis of service auditor's opinion. And the case of type 1 report, a statement that service auditor has no perform any procedure regarding operating effectiveness and control therein, no opinion expressed therein. A statement of the limitation of the control, and in the case type 2 report, the risk of projection of future period and evaluation of the operating effectiveness and control. One service auditor opinion express a positive form where all the material based on the suitable criteria that are type 2 report and type 1 report. The description of fairly presented service organization system that has been designed and implemented throughout the specific period. So the control related to the control objectives stated in the service organization description of its systems suitably designed throughout the specific period, and control tested which were necessary to be provided reasonable assurance that the control objective stated in the description were achieved and operated effectively throughout the specific period. In the case of type 1 report, the description fairly presented the service organization system that has been designed and implemented in a specific date. The control related to control objective stated in the service organization describing of a system to suitable design on a specific date. The date of service organization assurance report, which are earlier than the date of the service auditor obtaining sufficient about audit evidence on the same day. Signature. The signature report should be signed by the practitioner. The place of signature, the report should be name, specify location, ordinary cities, ordinarily or city where the report is signed. Additional matter required to be reported in type 2 report. In the case of type 2 report, a service auditor assurance report shall include separate section about their opinion or an attachment that describes the test of control that are performed and resulting of the fact. Now, in describing the test controls, a service auditor should clearly state, which controls are tested and identify whether the test item presented all are selected the items are in the population, and identify the nature of test in the significant details and enable the user to determine the effect such test on the risk assessment. Describing the test of controls. Test of control. The specific science as service auditor shall clearly state which controls are tested, identify whether these items tested representing all or selection of these items in the population, and indicate the nature of test is sufficient detail to enable user auditor to determine the effect of such test on the risk assessment. If a deviation has been identified, the service auditor shall include the extent of test performed that led to identification of its deviation, including sample search, which sample has been used, and the number or nature of the deviation noted. The service auditor shall report the deviation even if the basis of the test performed and a service auditor has concluded that the related control objectives are achieved. Modified opinion. If the service auditor include that the service organization described as not fairly presented on all material aspects, a system is designed and implemented to not fairly respect the system design or not fairly presented on the implementation, they should modify. Service conclude that the service auditor conclude that modified opinion. In the control related to the control objectives stated in the description were not suitably designed, and all material aspect. All material they have to do, they modify. In the case of type 2 report, the control tested which those necessary to perform reasonable assurance that control objectives stated in the service organization to the description and the systems are achieved and did not operate effectively in all material aspect will modify the report. The service auditor is unable to insufficient appropriate audit evidence. The service auditor opinion shall be modified, and then service auditor assurance report shall contain a clear description of all the reason of this modification. Documentation. The service auditor shall prepare a document that is sufficient to enable the experienced service auditor has no previous connection with the engagement to understand the nature, timing, extent of procedure performed to comply with the standard of auditing assurance engagement and applicable legal and regulatory requirement. The result of the procedure performed and a result of evidence obtained, significant matters arising during the engagement and the conclusion reached thereon, and the significant professional judgment made in reaching this conclusion is all to be given.